permission, to record our
Yeah.
seminar. Yes, welcome to our spring seminars that as the Atatürk Faculty of Education, we organized this semester. With us today is Professor Bent Holm. Allow me to introduce him briefly, and then I'll give the microphone to him. Professor Bent Holm received a MA degree in theater studies and PhD with a doctoral dissertation on theater iconography and staging of royal power in the era of absolutism. He was an associate professor in the Department of Arts and Cultural Studies at the University of Copenhagen until 2014. Now he is a professor emeritus. He delivered lectures at various universities and research centers, recently in St. Petersburg and Tokyo. I believe you visited St. Petersburg before this terrible war erupted. Is that right, Bent? It should be last year, I believe. In 2021, he was a visiting professor in Florence. He served as a member of scientific committees in Italy. He is very active as dramaturg, collaborating with playwrights, stage directors, and set designers. He is a translator of Italian theater as well, especially Nobel Prize winner Dario Fo. He has published studies of historical, anthropological, and dramaturgical issues in various languages. Some of his recent publications include Religion, Ritual Theater, published in New York in 2008, and it was translated into Russian language in 2018. The Taming of the Turk, Ottomans, and on the Danish stage, 1596-1896, published in Vienna in 2014. Another book, Ludwig Holberg, the Danish playwright on the European stage, masquerade, comedy, and satire, published in Vienna in 2018. And the recent book he co-edited with Michael Rasmussen, entitled Imagined, Embodied, and Actual Turks in the Early Modern Europe, in Vienna 2021, which is under review for the Journal of the Journal of Ottoman Studies. Yes, I believe the reviewer will be here, is joining us and listening. Will be listening your seminar. And today he will speak about historical images of the Turk in Danish arts, politics, and historiography. The floor is yours, Ben.
Thank you, Shafi, and thank you, first of all, for the invitation. Maybe I should go a little bit on with a presentation, because it is not a very, let's say, obvious choice for a Danish scholar, and especially not for a theater scholar, to focus on the relationships with between one's own country and the Ottoman Empire. You already mentioned that I am also working as a theater practitioner, as a dramaturg, and it was in such a connection, I think in 2006, that I was working collaborating with a project concerning a classical Danish dramatic text, which we all thought we knew, but it mentioned some names related to the Barbary states. And then I thought nobody had wondered, so I thought, what is this? And it turned out that it referred to a kind of historical reality, meaning that that was the actual Ottoman Empire that was at stake in that connection. And just to make a long story short, this opened for a new possibility of interpreting that text. And this project or research of mine has gone on since then. So what I'm going to talk about today is the image and the image of and when I say Turk, I say Turk. It's the Turk as a, let us say, metaphor. The relation between France and the Ottoman Empire, Germany and the Ottoman Empire, Hungary, Netherlands, Great Britain, and so on, has been very much analyzed and published. So I think it is, in a special way, rather interesting to look at the relationship between Ottoman/Turkish culture and history, and see that in a more broad historical context, also in order to understand how and why have we become those that we are today. This has to do also with identity. And that means that I will talk about, and please, no offense, the Turk, and I say Turk as an enemy image, as a point of identification, and also as a projection, meaning that I will imply what is more or less the title of the recently published volume, the imagined, the performed, and the actual Turk. And the actual Turk is most of all the Ottoman Empire in this historical perspective, in which I will focus especially on examples from the 16th and the 19th century. I have to say two words about the historical and geographical phenomenon called Denmark. If you go back to the 16th century, we were almost an empire. We had 4 languages: Danish, Norway was part of Denmark, part of Sweden was part of Denmark, and the Danish king was Duke of the North German territories. So he was part of the so-called German Roman Empire. And the story that I'm going to present very briefly is also a story about losses, because after the 13 Years' War, we lost what we had possessed of Sweden. After the Napoleonic Wars, we lost Norway. And in a very dramatic conflict with Germany, Austria in 1864, we lost the German parts of the realm, meaning that we became a micro nation. We are a little bit bigger today, but still we are a very small country. And those years, 1648, 1813, and 1864 are crucial years as for Danish identity history, because each time, in a very traumatic way, we had to ask ourselves, who are we? And we had to reconstruct a kind of national identity. And it is in that connection that the Turk plays a very important role, which I'll come back to. So I will go immediately to my first example. My technical assistant will wait until I ask you to show the image. But my first example goes back to 1596 with the coronation of a very young king, very important king, Christian IV. And as you know, the Christian church is split up. We are part of the northern so-called Protestantism, based on the theories, the theology of Martin Luther, and those south of that are Roman Catholics. And that period is a period of fierce religious conflicts and fights, meaning that when that young king was received his crown during his coronation, it should be clear that he was the defender of the true Christianity, the true religion against paganism and heresy. Heresy was the Catholic Church, and paganism was, for instance, the Ottoman Empire. At the coronation sermon at the cathedral in Copenhagen, it was immediately said that this event is crucial. Why? Because we live in the last days of the world. Doomsday is approaching. It was an eschatological perspective and context that this coronation ceremony must be understood into or within. And from the sermon in the cathedral to the celebrations, which were performative, including fireworks, pyrotechnicals, staged battles, and tournaments, you see that eschatological theme practiced, and only involving the context, and the context is, first of all, theological and historiographical. You can decode, decipher what really took place. And when I began to analyze these issues, it had not been done. It was only thought that this is very spectacular because Renaissance man has this joy of performing and so on and so forth, but it meant something. So if we see the first image, dear Seifi,
Sure.
Kenan.
Should I share it? Okay, hold on. Let me right away. I'm going to share this slide. And this is the very first one. It's here. Okay.
Right, this one.
Okay.
And is it okay that I can see the whole lot of slides? This is perfect.
Oh, okay.
Is it okay that I speak without you seeing me?
I see you.
Or do you do see me?
Yeah, we see you. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Here you see the tournament, and in the lower left park, what you see there is a sedan chair with a person, and if you go on to the next slide, which is a detail,
this one.
then you see the Pope. And the Pope, it's all mock staging, it's theater. This is simply the young king performing as the Pope. And it is not a real Pope, it is a fictitious Pope called Sergius VI, who has never existed. It's just an invented figure. And you see him surrounded by friars and monks and clergymen and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And after him followed, the chronicle says the Turk, the Turkish prince or Sultan Mehmet, and he was dressed, and if we take the next slide, as a daily warrior with those eagle wings and feathers and so on. So if you stop the slides and I just speak, sure. Then what we see is the Pope called Sergius, who arrives first, and then is followed by the Turk, and the one who performed as Turk was the king, was a German prince, the king's future father-in-law, a prince of Brandenburg. And if we should try to understand what this means, then we have to go back to the context, the coronation of the defender of the Lutheran religion. And Luther, who is the basis of our church and theology, wrote a so-called military sermon in 1529, when there was the great siege of Vienna by the Ottoman Empire. And that was the first siege of Vienna. Luther wrote this text and put the historical event into an apocalyptical context, referring it to the prophecies of Daniel, the prophet from the Old Testament, saying that in a vision, Daniel saw 4 monsters emerging from the sea, And according to Luther, and according also to conventional historiography of the era, those four monsters represented four empires, first the Greek, then the Assyrian, then the Persian, and as the last empire, the Roman. And that would be the last empire, because doomsday, the end of time, is approaching. That was a fact in the minds of people. But it says also in the prophecy, a small protuberance, a small being emerges from the monster representing the Roman Empire, and that small creature, Luther can tell us, is the Ottoman Empire. And that is another sign that shows us that time is running out, the end is approaching. But what is going to happen specifically in that era is that Antichrist, which is, of course, a diabolical, a demonic version of Christ, that Antichrist will appear. And Antichrist, and I still refer to Luther as the orthodox teacher of the theology and the fundament, the basis of the state and of the political and theological reality. Antichrist has a double nature, because he consists of a spiritual part and of a physical part. And the spiritual part is the Pope. The Pope has been sent by the devil in order to kill us spiritually. And the physical part, no surprise, is the Turk, and who has come. And this refers to the historical wars, that is, to the actual Turk, the Ottoman. This is what is happening while he is writing this, that the Ottoman army has come and is threatening the capital of the Roman German Empire. And this means that all that is said in that prophecy is correct. You can see it with your own eyes. And once again, it is the apocalyptic, the eschatological perspective that is underneath what happens on the historical stage and on the in the battlefield. So if we go back now to the coronation of Christian IV, we see first arriving on the tournament square, the Pope. And he has the name of Sergius VI. And Sergius is a name of a heretical monk who plays a part in a medieval anti-Islamic legend. He is part of some diabolical intrigue used in anti-Islamic propaganda. It's related also to the Bahira legend. So it's not just it's on purpose that this mock pope takes also the name of Sergius, meaning that he characterizes or parodies or ridicules at the same time heresy and paganism. And the Pope, who is the king himself, is followed, as Luther says, by the Turk. And those two make up, as we said, the double nature of Antichrist. This is simply in order to explain what was. You can take it away now. The illustration.
Sure.
What was really going on in the eyes and constructions of significance of the public in those days, and we must involve a lot of context, for instance, theological, in order to analyze and to understand on the premises in the perspective of that historical era, to understand what really went on. And this is the imagined, because it's the Turk as a metaphor. It is the performed Turk, because it took place. But if we involve also the actual context, then we see that this happens during the so-called Long Turkish War, which took place, and it was between the Roman-German Empire and the Ottoman Empire, took place from 1593 until 1606, sorry. And in the year 96, which was the year of coronation, we have the battle in Hungary of Keretsche, which was a dramatic defeat of the German imperial armies. And for that reason, we see that a lot of German princes who were invited to that coronation had to tell the king that thank you, but no thank you. We are occupied with fights with the Ottoman Empire. We cannot go. Meaning that the triumph, the victory over those diabolical forces is a fiction. What went on the actual battlefield told a quite different story. This was my first example. Time is running, so I will go on and just show you the next slide, which is a painting showing Herod. And this was a painting that was ordered by the King Christian IV, and shows the cruel king who was the diabolical force at the arrival of the Messiah. And he's although he's Jewish, he is shown as, once again, the Turk. We'll just the painting. No, just the painting. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So at the arrival of the Messiah and at the reappearance, the return of the Messiah, which was the eschatological dimension or perspective of the coronation, we see the Turk playing that, and I must repeat and underline, when I say the Turk, I say the Turk, and it is in a metaphorical sense, played a major role.
Imagine Turk, in other words, right?
Yeah, exactly. Imagined. So I would, if you take away the slide, then what happened was that in the later days of the reign of Christian IV, we lost, as we said, the part of Sweden that was Danish. Now I go ahead to the 18th century, and I go on focusing on the notion of the national identity, because the beginning of the 19th century is characterized by that reduction of the realm. As I said, we lost Norway, and also by movements that gradually move the conception and notion of power from absolutism to democracy, meaning that now the people is going to take over power and be the main character of history. And those two conditions imply that renewed search for identity. We had to ask ourselves, and so on and so forth. This is the so-called golden age. We had geniuses in Copenhagen, which was a small city, like Kierkegaard, Hans Christian Andersen. I hope you are familiar with Andersen as the great fairy tale author.
We grow up by reading his fairy tales. Most of
so did we. So we have that in common. I'm very happy to know and hear that. Yeah. But the more metaphorical dimensions of identification were either antiquity, that is Greek and Roman, art and culture, Norse, that is, let's say the Vikings, in order to go back to them. And as the third dimension, it was the Oriental area of reference. And when we say Oriental, we mean Turkish. At stage, for instance, everything that was Oriental was defined as Turkish, but we had that need of points of reference in order to define ourselves. And at the same time, historiographically, we are, as I said, in the so-called golden age in the first half of the 19th century. There were some theological ideas that repeated the idea of us living in the last of times. The eschatological theme was part of that reality, the historiographical and theological dimension, which I must repeat and underline, is some kind of cultural mental basis of conception of ourselves and reality. In 1805, a play was written which was a kind of identity myth for all Danish romanticism. We are in the period of romanticism. And the play is called Aladdin. It is about the son of the people, that is, a common man who is now gradually going to take over power, called democracy. And he is a genius of intuition. He is, quote, the merry son of nature. And that play, that text became a kind of national myth in Danish self-understanding, because the counter figure of Aladdin, of the intuitive genius son of the people, was Nureddin, who is rational, logic, intellectual, reaches his results through speculation. And for us, that is the Germans, our historical enemy. So we saw ourselves as, and I must say, a Turk. Aladdin was a Turk, and he was the national figure of identification until that myth collapsed, meaning that the true Dane is a Turk, that the Oriental figure is not the other. The Oriental figure is yourself. And he is characterized by what later times would call feminine qualities, whereas Nureddin, the German, is what we might call more masculine. And I think this is extremely important in order to understand the complexity of what we are talking about now. We have as a central figure of that period, but please do remember Aladdin, because I'll come back to him. We have a figure because artists, architects, painters, authors began traveling in different cultures, and they went also to the Middle East and to Oriental countries and so on. And one of them was Hans Christian Andersen. And the interesting thing is, and now we can see his sketch of the dancing dervishes. And this is taken from his diary. He went to Istanbul, then called at that time called Constantinople, and he wrote his diary, he wrote letters, and then he wrote a travelogue. And you can follow the process from the actual documentation, very precise in his letters and diaries, until his more imagined, sometimes short story-like depictions in his travelogue, but never orientalizing. He has, for instance, a depiction of a graveyard at Üsküdar. And if you go to the Museum of the Dervish in Istanbul, and where they perform the way of whirling dancing, you will find the description of the ritual and the dance in English and Turkish, written by Andersen there. And it's so precise that what you might expect to be a kind of yeah, romanticizing or exoticizing. You don't. He simply shows great respect and empathy of what he sees, and then of course he transforms it in his own poetic way, as you can see at the next slide, a paper cut showing Istanbul, some minarets, but this, of course, is his way of transforming it into a kind of visual poetry. But if we go on to the next slide, then what we find in Copenhagen, founded in 1843, and you still find it, is a so-called entertainment garden called Tivoli. It was founded in, as I said, 43 by a person called Carstensen, Georg Carstensen, son of the last Danish consul in Algiers. And he traveled, he was born there, he traveled in the Ottoman Empire, and his architect also took sketches, went to Istanbul and so on, and came back. And then this is what you see, how they transformed it, so that that kind of new identity of the bourgeois class, of the citizens who were going to take over power, could very often was projected into that visual universe, which has to do also with the idea of the I would say myth of Aladdin, the people as the genius, so they could, so to speak, perform their democratic identity in, for instance, the Tivoli Garden. And if we go to the next slide, then we find that the founder of Danish ballet at the Royal Theatre of Copenhagen is internationally important and famous, Auguste Bournonville. He was the first theater director, or to stage Aladdin by Oehlenschläger, and he created his own ballet version of that story called Abdallah. And I just show you some of the female costumes, so you can see this is a kind of combination of Occidental and Oriental styles. But it is once again the story about the common man who has to learn responsibility in order to take over power, so that the people should be the new ruler, but not forgetting that kind of intuition and immediate empathy that characterizes the Turk as a Danish identification figure. And if we just, this is from 1855, as you see, and you could remove the slide. And if we look at the actual historical stage, this takes place during the Crimean War between, for instance, the Ottoman Empire and Russia, of all nations, but there is no relation between that imaginative dimension, which has to do with, as we said, the understanding of oneself, that new identity, and then what went on the actual stage. If we then go on with the next slide, then it happened that the king, then called Frederick VII, he in 1859 received a visit from an Ottoman Egyptian prince, Mehmet Ali. He was the youngest son of the founder of the Egyptian dynasty, Mehmet Ali Pasha. And what had happened then was that fashion among not only the bourgeoisie, but also the royal head of the country had been orientalized, that it was a fashion to dress as the king did, and it's the king on the left, the Danish king, with a fez, and to dress in a Turkish way. So when he received that Ottoman prince, who in the Royal Theatre kept on his fez, but the king normally wore his, they were almost each other's mirrors, because the Ottoman prince had been occidentalized, leaving kaftan and turban and using instead the fez, meaning that he was a let's say modern and in a certain way occidentalized Turk, whereas the king was an orientalized Westerner who thought that he, so to speak, played a Turk. And if we take the next slide, then you will find it in the center. It is the king, and you see his face, and it is at his country castle called Jægerspris, where he had made a so-called Turkish hall. Especially you see the ceiling, which was thought to be extremely Turkish. The interesting thing is that when you see those two princes, the Danish and the Ottoman Egyptian, they are more or less mirrors of each other. And if you look at the new palaces in Istanbul, Dolmabahce and the others from the middle of the 19th century, you see that same style as you see here. And that is partly because there was a Turkish Orientalism, which was a kind of construction of some Occidental, some Persian, some Arab components, which became highly fashionable in, for instance, England, and as you see, also in Denmark. And sometimes they were even those highly fashionable Occidental styles were imitated also in some cases in Istanbul. And there's that kind of theatrical dimension connected to it, even to a degree that one of the co-designers of the Dolmabahce Palace was a scenographer from the Grand Opera in Paris. So this is what I would say mixed style that is somewhere between East and West. And if we go on, then I will come to my last example. No, take it out. We'll come back to that. If you,
Sure.
Yes, you have to look at me instead. If we go on to the national trauma and disaster in 1864, when we lost the German parts of the realm, that was the great collapse of the Aladdin myth. It was the German enemy who defeated us, and this left us with a trauma, as I said, that maybe we still feel the effects of, in a way. And now it came back that there was, from ancient times, a popular prophecy saying that when the Turk invaded Jutland and gave water to his horse in the cathedral of Viborg, then doomsday was approaching, the end of times was near, and Christ, the Messiah, would come back. That was an old popular belief and part of what we will call folklore. But when this happened, that the Germans mutilated the Danish territory and the Danish self-understanding, it came up, and one of our greatest poets wrote, so this was fulfilled, only that it was not the Turk, it was the German who played that role. And now we can see once again that the world is going to an end. But we had to come back to move on and to strengthen the national myth. And one of those who participated in that process was Bournonville, the choreographer that we talked about in connection with Aladdin and Abdallah. So he had to reinforce the national myth that had been scattered and destroyed. And he did that making a ballet called Court Adela in Venice, which premiered in 1870. Court Adler was a Danish hero. He was a sailor, and he went in the middle of the 17th century. He went into military service of Venice and Malta, fighting the Turks. We'll come back to his coat of arms.
Stop.
Yeah, good, perfect. He fought the Ottoman navy and destroyed, some say, 7 warships. And according to the legend, he jumped on board the Turkish admiral's vessel, took the admiral's sword and cut off his head. And that sword is still preserved at the National Museum of Copenhagen. And when a Danish king in the 1680s tried to reconquer the part of Sweden that we have had lost during the 30 Years' War, he took that scimitar, that legendary scimitar, and tried that going ahead his army with that scimitar, he could win the army, the war. He lost it. But a couple of months ago, it was exhibited at the Museum of Muslim Art in Copenhagen, so-called David's collection, and it was clear it has nothing to do with that period. It's a legend. But anyway, Bournonville, he took up that story about the heroic Danish admiral and created his very national romantic ballet showing this great hero who at the same time was a true Lutheran Protestant believer in Venice, and was betrayed because he was not willing to abjure his Protestant belief, was betrayed by the Jesuits, by the Catholic Church as a heretic, and was put in jail. But the Turks threatened the Republic of Venice, and who could save the city and the country? Nobody but Court Adelard, the Danish hero. So they had to release him, and he went with his warships against the Ottoman navy, and in the last act in the finale of the ballet, you see him conquer that admiral's vessel and defeat the Turks, meaning the Germans. And this was his way of trying to recreate, to repair the Danish myth. And now we can see the coat of arms of Court Adelard, and you can see the 7 flags for the 7 with the half moon, and those are for the 7 warships. And if you see the middle field at your right, you see the arm, the sword, and the head of the beheaded Ottoman admiral. It's if you remove it, this took place. You can just take it away.
Okay.
Right. This takes place in a period when, from a historiographical point of view, you begin to have a quite different, a quite new, a quite modern approach to what we call source criticism, implying that some historians began a study of the story of Court Adelard based on documents and archives. And that showed that it turned out that all this that we heard about his heroic deeds was pure fiction. It was legends. And because of that, a book was published based on documents, and that's what we understand by historiography. But that caused Bournonville, the choreographer, to involve himself in polemics with the historians, saying that yes, maybe you have those documents, but truth is another thing. Truth is something that is much deeper, and myth, the national myth, is more true than the historical archives and documents can prove. And if you look into his ballet, and of course this is a clash between let's say the imagined and the actual figure. And if you look into the ballet and try to decipher once again what is really going on, then you see that first Kurt Adler, the glorious Danish hero, is betrayed by whom? By the Catholic Church. And then this opens for the entry of the Turk. The Turk. Meaning that we can draw a line backwards to what we started, our starting point 1 hour ago. That is the historiography, the eschatological way, conception of Martin Luther, the apocalypse involving that first the Pope will, Antichrist, the double nature of Antichrist. First, the Pope will arrive in order to kill or damage us spiritually, that is the Catholic Church, the Jesuits in the ballet, and then the second part of the double nature of Antichrist, the Turk, will appear in order to kill us physically. So I think I have used the time I have been given, but we could try to talk a little bit more about the overall perspective, which I really do hope that I have opened for reflections about in this short introduction to an enormous material. And as I said, why is this important? It is important because the so-called Golden Age is the Golden Age also of Danish culture and politics, even today. It plays an enormous role. And then to me, I mean, history is important. Why? In order to understand what happens, who are we, what are our relations today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for this fascinating talk. When you look at the picture or painting whatever you have, it looks very plain and simple to certain minds or to certain eyes. But as you, all the audience realize, there are enormous stories behind all these fascinating paintings, even though it's just a plain drawing. Incredible stories, and it really requires huge further research to get into the details how imagination, religion, culture, and international relations and within empirical experience really got woven all together in certain climate or certain era, depending on even the spirit of time too. We should add into the context here. I'd like to open up the floor for question and answer or comments you would like to make. Here you can raise your hand, in the reactions section, tepkiler. You can parmak kaldır, although in English it's raise your hand, but either way. So I'm going to give you a chance to pose your questions or make your comments, and also you can pose your questions here. You can formulate questions in the chat box, sohbet section here, and I can read the questions. Everybody can unmute themselves, right, Erol Bey? They can get in. Yeah, I think we don't have a very large audience, but still we have a good audience. Most of us, our colleagues and young fellow doctoral and master's students I see here. And Shura, Ms. Shura, you raise your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for your valuable sharing from very, different perspectives. I'm reading your book in detail now, and as you mentioned there, your book is functioning like there is a word, kaleidoscope. So
yeah, right.
I want to share with the audience, right? I got the same feeling from your speech because I got reflections on reflections. Thank you very much. If that is not too private, please, if that is private, please ignore, but I'm really curious about what is the presently image of the Turks for you?
It's kaleidoscopic because you talked about the Turks. I've only talked about the Turk, and the Turk in my connection is either imagined, performed, or actual. The Turks, you asked about you used the word image.
Presently image, because you talk about historical image of the Turks, but
yeah, because then I won't say that I personally have an image. I have a knowledge, and that knowledge is very kaleidoscopic. So I think that maybe my personal image is not that interesting, but part of the complications of relationships, which are a fact between our cultures, I think you cannot understand unless you do go back to what I would call the mental roots, the collective cultural points of significance. So I talk in the book about, yes, kaleidoscopic, but also about prism. So my answer is not an answer. It is a kind of observation that says that if we could make those prisms more transparent, then I think that the understanding between certain cultures that today is not perfect, that would improve very much. This is not an answer. I'm very much aware of that. And that is because you maybe deliberately asked about the Turks, and I have no answer, but the Turk, I do not personally have an image of the Turk, let's say, today, but I have an impression of a relationship which is, in my opinion, to a too high degree, is marked also by cliches. And when I talked about the Aladdin myth, I deliberately talked about the Turk or the Oriental character not as the other, but as the self. I talked about the female qualities as positive identity components, and as you can hear, it is not very implicit polemics with the Orientalism of Said. And I think that what we need to is go, like Bournonville did not want to go to the sources, to face the theological interpretations and so on, and analyze them without a fixed point of departure. And to me, the Saidian way is extremely risky. You cannot read, but I myself am a heretic. I read texts in a different way from what is fashion, because Orientalism is very fashionable. And if you read, for instance, Aladdin with that optics, you don't understand anything. So I cling to the kaleidoscopic image, and my answer is the non-answer that my image is kaleidoscopic. Sorry, that's.
And I got it. I got 2 points that the culture with the other cultures are inseparable and unthinkable, I think. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great point. Great point. No, I'm very glad that you put it that way, because that's also one of the points that I humbly must say that I discovered, and it was a kind of revelation, an eye-opener to me.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you. Any other questions or comments? I can give a little bit more time to our audience. Perhaps they may have a question. It's interesting. Yes, that's also attracts my attention. Of course, I didn't study too much about Danish intellectuals or researchers focus on Islamic culture or the Middle East. But up to the pain, I mean, of course, we've been in contact with one another, and you shared several of your experience, some other paintings and other books as well. And also, I've read, for instance, Johannes Peders and the book culture in the Islamic world, and some other books or works, academic works I can give as an example. The point that the aspect that I observe is that the way that Edward Said complains about the Orientalism in Europe, somehow Danish intellectuals shied away, or they put a nice, distance between themselves and that type of exoticizing the other vis-a-vis, Muslims or Turks. But the imagined Turk is a fascinating story. Just a, mockery of something, whatever that is. But just curious how the Danish culture managed to keep themselves from that type of exoticizing other cultures, or maybe vis-a-vis Turks or even Muslim culture too. Is it something has to do with the university culture or the way? Can you elaborate on it a little bit, perhaps?
It may have to do with the fact that we did not to that extent have any colonies. We are not seeing ourselves as what you would call a master people. So we do not to that extent consider ourselves as superior. I think that is part of a historical explanation. So our enemy images are more related to the imagined dimension. And the imagined dimension, and you are absolutely true, and that was also my point about Andersen, that the sense of the, let's say, actual Turk is very strong,
Right.
is very strong. And it surprised me that Andersen, the great romanticist and fairy tale author, is I mean, he spent 10 days in Istanbul, but
Right.
it's so precise in all details what he wrote that I think it is in a kind of particular category, this approach. And yeah, I think that the actual Turk plays a remarkable great role in this cultural context, and that the imagined Turk, I hope that it became rather clear, is kaleidoscopic, meaning that the Saidian projection or the Saidian idea of the Occidental projection of a so-called other doesn't go for that national culture. It's another story with France, England, and they were colonialists. You have in pictorial arts Orientalism in first of all French painting. You won't find it. We have joked very much about Rørby, the Danish painter, and he went to the Ottoman Empire and he painted everyday scenes of everyday life from the cafe, and no odalisks or warriors or cruelties or anything. It's a kind of this golden age is also called poetic realism, but it's a kind of sense of realism that you will find in Danish literature and art, that also became a problem because we had a female painter, Elisabeth Jerikau Baumann, who went to Istanbul in the 1870s, and she was originally German and or Polish, but was educated as an artist, a painter in Germany, and she painted that kind of very colorful and staged and spectacular, for instance, odalisks, but she was not accepted in the Danish cultural life. It was too exotic.
Too exotic.
If you see.
Thank you. This is great. It's almost an hour and a half. Is there any other remarks or questions? Yes, absolutely. Extremely informative, insightful session. Shura remarks on the chat room. Thank you for your kind words. Is there any other comments and or questions you would like to pose? Otherwise, we should end here. It seems no further questions. Again, thank you, dear friend. There's no boundary in friendship, especially in the culture, in the intellectual friendship. No boundary in terms of region, culture, and geography or institutions. We can connect through these kind of great mediums in the modern times. thank you for facilitating. Thank you for coming and presenting such a fascinating topic and sharing your points of the thought-provoking ideas with the imagination that you have in your minds and based on readings, of course, primarily. And thank you again. I'd like to clap give you.
Thank you. And once again, thank you for the invitation. It was a great pleasure to meet you, all of you. I receive invitations, so if we could meet personally, it would be
Absolutely.
a great pleasure also to meet.
Yes, you were with us before the pandemic. Of course, looking forward to have you again, have a Turkish coffee or tea or kebab, whatever you like, with your wife again. Yeah, of course, you came with
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice
Okay.
occasion. Absolutely. Looking forward to have you again. Keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You take care.